The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ravenswood Palace as King Edmund prepared for what would become the most talked-about moment in the kingdom's recent history. At 63, he had ruled for over 2 decades, always maintaining the careful balance between personal desire and royal duty that his position demanded. But today, something felt different in the air, electric with possibility and danger. Queen Margaret, his wife of 35 years, sat at her ornate vanity, applying the final touches of makeup that would mask the exhaustion she felt deep in her bones. Their marriage had been arranged when they were both young, a union meant to strengthen political alliances between two powerful noble families. Over the decades, they had learned to respect each other, even developed a form of affection, but passion had never been part of their equation. She understood the rules of their world. Duty came first, always. In another wing of the palace, Princess Catherine was adjusting her emerald green dress, the one that brought out the stunning color of her eyes. At 38, she had become the most beloved member of the royal family, known for her genuine warmth and ability to connect with people from all walks of life. Her marriage to Prince William, the king's eldest son and heir to the throne, had been celebrated across the kingdom as a true love match. Together, they had 3 children and represented the modern face of the monarchy. Catherine had no idea that her life was about to change forever. She was focused on the day's events, a grand charity gala that would raise funds for children's hospitals across the kingdom. It was a cause close to her heart, and she had spent months planning every detail. The guest list included dignitaries, celebrities, and wealthy donors from around the world. The media would be watching closely, as they always did, ready to capture every moment for the millions of people who followed the royal family's activities. The relationship between Catherine and her father-in-law had always been complex. King Edmund had watched her transform from a nervous young woman into a confident princess who could handle any situation with grace. There had been moments over the years, fleeting glances, conversations that lasted a bit too long, times when his hand had lingered on her arm during official photos, that had created an undercurrent of tension neither of them acknowledged aloud. Queen Margaret had noticed these moments too. She was not a foolish woman, despite what some might think. Years of royal training had taught her to observe everything while appearing to see nothing. She had watched her husband's behavior around Catherine with growing concern, recognizing signs she had hoped never to see. The way his voice softened when he spoke to her, the way he found excuses to be in the same room, the way his eyes followed her during public events. Palace staff had also begun to whisper. Servants who had worked in the royal household for decades knew how to read the subtle signs of trouble brewing beneath the polished surface. They noticed when the king spent longer than necessary reviewing Catherine's schedule, when he asked detailed questions about her activities, when he suggested changes to protocols that would increase their interactions. The head butler, Thomas, who had served 3 generations of the royal family, found himself walking on eggshells, unsure how to handle what he was observing. The morning of the charity gala brought unexpected complications. Prince William had fallen ill with a severe case of food poisoning and would be unable to attend. This meant Catherine would need an escort, and royal protocol demanded it be a male member of the family. The obvious choice would have been Prince Andrew, William's younger brother, but he was traveling abroad on official business. This left King Edmund as the only appropriate option. When the decision was announced, the palace staff exchanged knowing looks. Thomas instructed the younger servants to be extra attentive that day, sensing that careful observation would be necessary. He had seen enough royal scandals in his time to know when trouble was brewing. The way the king's entire demeanor changed when told he would escort Catherine made Thomas's stomach turn with worry. Catherine received the news while reviewing her speech for the gala. Her personal secretary, Maria, delivered the message with careful neutrality, but Catherine could see the concern in her eyes. They had worked together for over a decade, and Maria had become more than an employee. She was a trusted friend who genuinely cared about Catherine's well-being. The slight frown that crossed Maria's face when she mentioned the king's escort duties spoke volumes. The hours leading up to the gala were filled with unusual tension. Queen Margaret made several pointed comments about the importance of maintaining proper appearances, her words carrying double meanings that everyone understood but no one addressed directly. She spent longer than usual selecting her jewelry for the evening, choosing pieces that emphasized her status as queen and Edmund's wife. Her lady-in-waiting, Eleanor, helped her dress while both women maintained careful silence about the elephant in the room. Catherine found herself changing her dress 3 times, unable to settle on what felt appropriate for the evening. Each option seemed either too formal or too casual, too revealing or too conservative. She finally settled on a navy blue gown with long sleeves and a modest neckline, hoping to strike the right balance. Her stylist commented that she seemed nervous, but Catherine brushed off the observation, claiming she was simply excited about the charity event. As the afternoon progressed, palace security conducted their usual sweeps and preparations. The head of security, Commander Roberts, reviewed every detail of the evening's schedule. He had been protecting the royal family for 15 years and had developed an instinct for potential problems. Something about the day's arrangements made him uneasy, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly what. He quietly increased the number of security personnel assigned to the event and briefed his team to be especially vigilant. The media arrived early, setting up cameras and preparing for what they expected to be a routine royal appearance. Royal correspondent Jessica Mills had covered the family for over a decade and knew how to read the subtle signs of palace drama. When she learned that King Edmund would be escorting Catherine instead of Prince William, she immediately sensed a story brewing. She instructed her camera crew to pay close attention to body language and interactions throughout the evening. Palace PR Director David Sterling spent the afternoon fielding calls from reporters asking about Prince William's illness and the change in arrangements. Each conversation required careful navigation, providing enough information to satisfy curiosity while protecting the family's privacy. He had worked in royal communications for 20 years and understood the delicate balance between transparency and discretion. Something about the day's questions made him nervous, as if the media sensed there was more to the story than a simple case of food poisoning. The kitchen staff worked overtime preparing for the gala, but their usual cheerful chatter was subdued. Even they could feel the tension that seemed to permeate every corner of the palace. Head chef Francois, who had been cooking for the royal family for 18 years, noticed how carefully the king inspected the menu for the evening, paying particular attention to Catherine's dietary preferences. It was an unusual level of detail that made Francois uncomfortable. In her private sitting room, Catherine tried to focus on her speech notes, but found her mind wandering to the strange atmosphere that had settled over the palace. She couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen, though she couldn't imagine what. Her phone buzzed with a text from William, apologizing again for missing the gala and telling her how proud he was of her work with the charity. Reading his words made her heart ache with guilt over feelings she couldn't quite name or understand. Queen Margaret stood at her bedroom window, watching the grounds where workers were making final preparations for the evening's event. The gardens looked magnificent, with thousands of flowers arranged in perfect displays and elegant lighting creating a magical atmosphere. She should have felt proud of the beautiful setting her staff had created, but instead, she felt a growing sense of dread. Years of marriage had taught her to trust her instincts about her husband's behavior, and every instinct was screaming that tonight would bring trouble. The afternoon light began to fade as palace staff put the finishing touches on their preparations. Servers practiced their movements through the ballroom, ensuring every detail would be perfect. Musicians tuned their instruments and reviewed their playlist. Photographers tested their equipment and discussed the best angles for capturing the evening's highlights. Everyone was professional and focused, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation that went beyond normal pre-event excitement. King Edmund spent longer than usual getting ready, consulting with his valet about every detail of his appearance. He chose a classic black tuxedo with a deep blue bow tie that would complement Catherine's dress, though he claimed the coordination was coincidental. His valet, James, had been dressing the king for over 20 years and had never seen him pay such attention to his appearance for a charity event. The king seemed nervous, excited, and distracted all at once, a combination that made James deeply uncomfortable. Catherine's final preparations took place under the watchful eye of her security detail. Her protection officer, Sarah, had been assigned to the princess for 8 years and knew her habits and moods better than almost anyone. She noticed how Catherine kept checking her reflection, adjusting tiny details that were already perfect. There was an energy about the princess that Sarah had never seen before, a mixture of excitement and apprehension that seemed out of proportion to the evening's events. As the sun set behind the ancient trees surrounding the palace, the first guests began to arrive. Luxury cars wound up the curved driveway, their headlights creating streams of light through the gathering darkness. The red carpet had been rolled out, photographers were in position, and palace staff stood ready to welcome the kingdom's elite to what they expected to be another successful royal charity event. None of them could have predicted what the night would bring. In a few hours, a single moment would change everything for the royal family, creating ripples that would be felt for years to come. The careful balance of relationships, built over decades, was about to be shattered by one impulsive gesture that would be witnessed by hundreds of people and broadcast around the world. The stage was set for a drama that would test the very foundations of the monarchy and force everyone involved to question everything they thought they knew about duty, loyalty, and love. As the first guests made their way into the palace, the final act of the royal family's carefully maintained facade was about to begin. The great ballroom of Ravenswood Palace had been transformed into a wonderland of golden lights and flowing silk drapes. 500 of the kingdom's most influential citizens moved through the space like elegant dancers, their conversations creating a gentle hum beneath the classical music performed by the Royal Symphony Orchestra. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables laden with exquisite food and fresh flowers, while the scent of gardenias and roses filled the air. It was exactly the kind of perfect royal event that the palace had been hosting for centuries. Queen Margaret made her entrance first, wearing a stunning silver gown that sparkled with every step. Her crown, a masterpiece of diamonds and sapphires that had been worn by queens for over 200 years, caught the light magnificently. The guests applauded respectfully as she moved through the room, stopping to speak with various dignitaries and donors. Her smile was perfect, her posture flawless, but those who knew her well could see the tension in her shoulders and the way her fingers gripped her clutch purse just a little too tightly. Palace photographer Michael Chun positioned himself strategically around the room, his camera ready to capture the evening's highlights for the official record. He had been documenting royal events for 12 years and had developed an eye for the moments that mattered. Tonight felt different somehow, charged with an energy he couldn't quite identify. He noticed how the Queen's usual warmth seemed forced, how the staff moved with unusual precision, how even the orchestra seemed to be playing with extra attention to perfection. Lady Victoria Pemberton, one of the kingdom's most prominent socialites and a longtime friend of the royal family, held court near the champagne fountain. At 65, she had attended more royal events than she could count and had become an unofficial keeper of palace gossip. She had arrived early specifically to observe the dynamics of the evening, having heard whispers about tensions within the royal family. Her sharp eyes missed nothing as she greeted other guests and carefully noted who spoke to whom and for how long. The charity's director, Dr. Sarah Webb, felt a mixture of pride and nervousness as she watched the elegant crowd supporting her cause. She had worked for 15 years to build the Children's Hospital Foundation into the kingdom's most respected medical charity, and tonight represented the culmination of months of planning. The funds raised would allow them to open 3 new pediatric wings in underserved areas. She had met Princess Catherine several times during the planning process and had been impressed by her genuine commitment to helping sick children. Foreign dignitaries added an international flavor to the gathering. Ambassador Jean-Claude Moreau from France chatted with his counterpart from Italy while their wives compared jewelry and gowns. The Spanish trade minister discussed economic cooperation with several local business leaders while keeping one eye on the royal family's movements. These diplomatic guests understood that royal events served multiple purposes beyond their stated charitable goals, and they watched carefully for signs of the kingdom's political health. Media coverage was restricted to the early arrivals and formal speeches, but several prominent journalists attended as guests. Royal biographer Amanda Wright mingled with the crowd while mentally taking notes for her next book. She had spent 20 years studying the royal family and had developed theories about the complex relationships within the palace walls. Tonight's unusual arrangements had caught her attention, and she planned to observe carefully for any signs of the drama she suspected was brewing beneath the surface. The business community was well represented, with several billionaire philanthropists competing quietly to see who could pledge the largest donation. Tech mogul Robert Chun, whose software company had made him one of the kingdom's richest men, had flown in specifically for the gala. His wife, Elizabeth, wore a gown that cost more than most people's annual salary and diamonds that sparkled like small suns. They moved through the crowd with the confidence that only extreme wealth could provide, but even they fell silent when the royal family appeared. Catherine's entrance stopped conversations throughout the ballroom. Her navy blue gown flowed like water as she moved, and her famous smile lit up the entire room. She wore her late mother-in-law's sapphire necklace, a choice that sent a clear message about her position within the royal family. But it was the way she carried herself that truly impressed the guests, with a combination of grace, confidence, and genuine warmth that made her seem both royal and accessible at the same time. The reaction to Catherine's appearance was immediate and electric. Cameras flashed as photographers captured her arrival, and guests whispered appreciatively about her elegant style. Young girls in the crowd looked at her with obvious admiration, while their mothers evaluated every detail of her outfit and jewelry. The princess moved through the room like a natural, stopping to speak with various guests and remembering personal details that made each conversation feel special and important. Palace staff worked seamlessly to ensure every aspect of the evening ran smoothly. Waiters glided through the crowd with trays of champagne and canapes, while security personnel maintained their vigilant watch from strategic positions around the room. Head butler Thomas coordinated the service with military precision, but his attention was divided between his duties and his growing concern about the evening's unusual atmosphere. He had instructed his staff to be especially observant, and their reports were already making him nervous. The evening's program included several speakers who shared stories about the impact of the charity's work. Dr. Webb spoke emotionally about a 7-year-old patient whose life had been saved by equipment purchased with funds from previous galas. A former patient, now a healthy teenager, thanked the crowd for their support with tears in his eyes. These moments reminded everyone why they were there and added genuine meaning to the elegant festivities surrounding them. Local news anchors provided coverage for television audiences, describing the glamorous scene and highlighting the impressive guest list. Royal correspondent Jessica Mills had positioned herself strategically to observe the family dynamics throughout the evening. Her years of experience had taught her to watch for the subtle signs that indicated trouble brewing beneath the polished surface. She noticed how Queen Margaret and Catherine seemed to be avoiding each other, how their conversations appeared forced when they did interact. The auction portion of the evening generated tremendous excitement as guests bid on everything from luxury vacations to private concerts by famous musicians. A week at a private island resort donated by a real estate mogul sparked a fierce bidding war between 3 wealthy couples. An original painting by a renowned artist eventually sold for twice its estimated value. The competitive atmosphere brought out the playful side of the kingdom's elite, who enjoyed showing off their wealth for such a worthy cause. Catherine moved through these interactions with practiced ease, but careful observers noticed subtle changes in her behavior as the evening progressed. She seemed to be looking toward the ballroom entrance more frequently than necessary, and her conversations, while still warm and engaging, appeared slightly distracted. Her lady-in-waiting, Maria, stayed close by, ready to assist with any needs but also serving as a protective buffer between the princess and overly enthusiastic guests. Queen Margaret maintained her position as the evening's hostess with characteristic dignity, but those who knew her well could see signs of strain. She spoke with each guest group for exactly the right amount of time, long enough to be gracious, but not so long as to neglect others. Her decades of experience in royal protocol served her well, but there was something mechanical about her performance tonight that suggested her mind was elsewhere. Palace security remained on high alert throughout the evening, though their vigilance appeared routine to casual observers. Commander Roberts moved discreetly through the crowd, maintaining communication with his team through nearly invisible earpieces. He had increased staffing levels based on his instincts about potential problems, and his officers reported everything they observed directly to him. The mood in the security room was tense, though none of the agents could explain exactly why they felt so on edge. The orchestra's performance provided an elegant soundtrack to the evening's conversations and activities. The conductor, Maestro Giovanni Rossi, had chosen a program of classical favorites that would appeal to the sophisticated audience without overwhelming their discussions. The musicians, dressed in formal black attire, played with the precision and passion that had made the Royal Symphony Orchestra famous throughout Europe. Their music created the perfect atmosphere for both intimate conversations and grand moments. As the evening progressed, palace staff began preparing for the highlight of the night, the formal presentation and speeches that would mark the official purpose of the gathering. Tables were cleared, chairs were arranged, and additional lighting was positioned to ensure perfect visibility for both the live audience and the television cameras that would broadcast excerpts to the kingdom's citizens. Everything was proceeding exactly according to the detailed schedule that had been planned for months. But beneath the surface of this perfect royal event, tensions were building toward a climax that no one could have predicted. The careful choreography of palace life, maintained through generations of tradition and protocol, was about to be disrupted in a way that would shock everyone present and create headlines around the world. The stage was being set for a moment that would test the very foundations of royal behavior and force everyone involved to confront truths they had been avoiding. The guests continued their elegant conversations, unaware that they were about to witness something that would be talked about for years to come. The royal family continued their practiced performances, not knowing that everything they had worked to maintain was about to change forever. In the midst of all the beauty and tradition of the evening, a storm was gathering that would sweep away the careful pretenses and reveal the complex human emotions that lay beneath the crown's glittering surface. The moment King Edmund entered the great ballroom, the entire atmosphere shifted like the air before a thunderstorm. He wore his formal ceremonial uniform, dark blue with gold braiding and medals that caught the light with every movement. At 63, he still commanded attention when he walked into a room, his presence filling the space with an authority that came from decades of ruling. But tonight, there was something different about his demeanor, an intensity that made even seasoned palace observers take notice. The guests turned toward their monarch with practiced respect, conversations pausing as he made his way through the crowd. Women curtsied gracefully while men bowed their heads in acknowledgement. King Edmund moved with purpose, speaking briefly with various dignitaries and donors, but his eyes kept scanning the room as if searching for someone specific. Palace staff noticed immediately that his usual warm engagement with guests seemed distracted, almost perfunctory. Queen Margaret watched her husband's entrance from across the room, her champagne glass held so tightly her knuckles showed white through her silk gloves. She had been married to Edmund for 35 years, long enough to read every nuance of his behavior. The way he moved tonight, the particular energy that surrounded him, filled her with a dread she tried desperately to hide behind her practiced royal smile. She exchanged meaningful glances with Lady Victoria Pemberton, her oldest friend, who had also noticed the king's unusual demeanor. The orchestra continued playing, but Maestro Rossi found himself watching the royal dynamics instead of focusing solely on his musicians. In his 15 years of conducting at palace events, he had developed an intuitive sense for the emotional undercurrents that ran through these gatherings. Tonight felt different, charged with tensions he couldn't identify, but definitely sensed. His musicians, too, seemed to feel the strange energy, playing with extra precision as if afraid to make any mistakes that might attract unwanted attention. Catherine stood near the charity display, discussing the foundation's work with Dr. Sarah Webb and several major donors, when she became aware of King Edmund's presence in the room. Without looking directly at him, she could sense his movement through the crowd, feel the particular energy that always seemed to surround him. Their relationship had always been complex, built on mutual respect, but complicated by undercurrents neither of them acknowledged openly. Tonight, that complexity felt magnified, as if the very air between them was electrically charged. Palace photographer Michael Chun positioned himself strategically to capture the formal moments of the evening, but found himself drawn to photograph the subtle interactions between family members. Through his lens, he noticed details that might escape casual observation. The way Queen Margaret's smile seemed forced, how Catherine appeared to be consciously avoiding looking in the king's direction, the unusual tension in King Edmund's shoulders despite his outward composure. Years of photographing the royal family had taught him to recognize when something important was happening beneath the surface. Foreign Ambassador Jean-Claude Moreau, a seasoned diplomat who had attended dozens of royal events, quietly observed the family dynamics with professional interest. He had been trained to read political situations through subtle social cues, and something about tonight's gathering suggested internal tensions within the royal household. He made mental notes while maintaining casual conversations with other guests, understanding that such observations might become important for diplomatic relations in the future. The charity auction continued with spirited bidding on various luxury items, but the real attention was increasingly focused on the royal family's movements through the ballroom. Tech mogul Robert Chun and his wife Elizabeth found themselves drawn into whispered conversations with other guests about the unusual energy of the evening. Everyone seemed to sense that something significant was brewing, though no one could identify exactly what they were feeling or expecting. Royal correspondent Jessica Mills discreetly positioned herself where she could observe all the key players while appearing to mingle casually with other guests. Her years of covering the royal family had taught her to recognize the signs of brewing drama, and tonight was setting off every instinct she had developed. She noticed how palace staff seemed more alert than usual, how security personnel maintained heightened awareness, how even the servers appeared to be moving with extra caution through the crowd. King Edmund finally approached the area where Catherine was standing, his path through the ballroom seeming casual but actually carefully calculated to bring him to her side. The conversations around them continued, but several guests found themselves unconsciously holding their breath as the monarch drew near his daughter-in-law. Palace protocol required formal acknowledgement between family members at public events, but there was something about this particular moment that felt charged with unusual significance. The formal greeting between King Edmund and Catherine began according to proper royal etiquette, with respectful bows and carefully chosen words about the evening's success. But as they spoke, observers noticed subtle changes in their body language that suggested deeper currents running beneath the polite conversation. The king's voice became softer, more intimate than appropriate for the public setting. Catherine's responses, while still proper, carried an underlying tension that hadn't been present in her earlier interactions throughout the evening. Queen Margaret watched this exchange from across the room, her heart pounding with a combination of anger, fear, and resignation. She had spent months noticing small signs of her husband's growing attention to Catherine, hoping she was imagining problems that didn't exist. But watching them together now, seeing the way Edmund's entire demeanor changed when he spoke with his daughter-in-law, confirmed her worst fears about the direction their family was heading. Palace staff throughout the ballroom began to sense that something unusual was happening. Head butler Thomas noticed how conversations seemed to pause whenever guests observed the king and princess together. Servers reported feeling an unusual tension in the air that made their normal duties feel more stressful. Even the musicians seemed affected, with several violinists missing notes they would normally play perfectly. The entire event was beginning to feel like a carefully balanced structure that could collapse at any moment. The conversation between King Edmund and Catherine gradually drew them slightly away from the main group of guests, creating a more intimate space that allowed for quieter discussion. To casual observers, they appeared to be having a normal family conversation about the charity event and its success. But those watching more carefully noticed the increasing intensity of their interaction, the way their voices dropped to whispers, the manner in which they seemed to be moving unconsciously closer together. Dr. Sarah Webb, the charity director, found herself in the awkward position of trying to continue discussing the foundation's work while the royal drama unfolded nearby. She attempted to engage other guests in conversation about their fundraising goals, but everyone's attention seemed drawn to the king and princess. The worthy cause that had brought them all together was being overshadowed by whatever was happening between the two most important members of the royal family. Security Chief Commander Roberts watched the developing situation with growing concern, understanding instinctively that his team needed to be prepared for any eventuality. He quietly alerted his officers to maintain extra vigilance while trying to identify exactly what kind of threat they might be facing. The tension in the room was palpable, but it wasn't the kind of security risk they normally prepared for. This was something more personal, more unpredictable, and potentially more dangerous to the royal family's reputation. Royal biographer Amanda Wright found herself witnessing what could become the most significant moment in her years of studying the monarchy. She positioned herself carefully to observe without appearing intrusive, understanding that she might be seeing history unfold before her eyes. The subtle changes in the king's behavior, the obvious discomfort of the queen, the strange energy that seemed to be building around Catherine, all of it suggested that this evening would be remembered for reasons far beyond its charitable purpose. The background noise of the gala continued. Conversations, laughter, the gentle clinking of crystal glasses, the orchestra's elegant melodies. But all of it seemed to fade into insignificance compared to the drama unfolding between King Edmund and Catherine. Guests who had come expecting a routine royal charity event found themselves witnessing something that felt far more personal and potentially explosive. The careful protocols that normally governed royal behavior seemed to be bending under the pressure of emotions that could no longer be contained. Palace PR Director David Sterling watched from near the entrance, already calculating how to manage whatever crisis might emerge from the evening's unusual dynamics. His phone buzzed with messages from media outlets asking about the king's demeanor and the family's interactions, suggesting that even the restricted press coverage was picking up on the strange energy of the night. He prepared himself for what could become a challenging few days of managing public perception and protecting the royal family's reputation. As the evening progressed toward its climactic moment, every person in the ballroom seemed to sense that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The careful choreography of royal life, maintained through centuries of tradition and protocol, was being tested by human emotions that refused to follow the prescribed script. What had begun as an elegant charity gala was transforming into something far more dramatic and unpredictable, setting the stage for a moment that would change everything for everyone involved. The moment arrived without warning, like lightning splitting a clear sky. King Edmund had been speaking quietly with Catherine near the charity display when Dr. Sarah Webb approached to introduce them to a major donor from Switzerland. As they turned to acknowledge the introduction, Catherine stumbled slightly on the marble floor, her high heel catching in the hem of her gown. It was a small, innocent mishap that could have happened to anyone in such formal attire. Instinctively, King Edmund reached out to steady her, his hands moving to her waist with the quick reflexes of someone trained to protect others. But instead of the brief, formal assistance that royal protocol would dictate, his hands lingered. His touch became something more personal, more intimate than appropriate for a king helping his daughter-in-law maintain her balance. Time seemed to slow as 500 guests watched their monarch's hands remain on Catherine's waist far longer than necessary. Catherine felt the warmth of his touch through the silk of her gown and found herself frozen in the moment. She should have stepped back immediately, should have restored the proper distance that royal protocol demanded between family members in public. Instead, she remained still, her eyes meeting Edmund's with an intensity that spoke of feelings neither of them had ever acknowledged aloud. For those few seconds, the rest of the ballroom seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them suspended in a moment that would change everything. The reaction was instantaneous and electric. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as guests registered what they were witnessing. Camera phones appeared in dozens of hands despite palace rules prohibiting unauthorized photography. Palace photographer Michael Chin found himself capturing the moment through his official camera, while his professional instincts warred with his understanding of how damaging these images could become. The click of camera shutters seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly quiet ballroom. Queen Margaret felt her heart stop as she watched her husband's hands remain on Catherine's waist. 35 years of marriage had prepared her for many challenges, but not for this public humiliation in front of the kingdom's most influential citizens. Her champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the silent room. The crash broke the spell that had held everyone motionless, and suddenly, the ballroom erupted with whispered conversations and shocked gasps. Palace security moved immediately into damage control mode, though they had no protocol for handling this type of crisis. Commander Roberts quickly signaled his team to position themselves strategically around the royal family, while trying to assess what kind of threat this moment posed to their safety and reputation. Several officers moved toward guests who were attempting to photograph or film the scene, politely but firmly requesting that they put away their devices. Lady Victoria Pemberton, Queen Margaret's closest friend, immediately moved toward the Queen to provide support and guidance. At 65, Victoria had witnessed enough royal scandals to understand the magnitude of what was unfolding. She quickly assessed the situation and began implementing damage control strategies, engaging nearby guests in conversation to distract them from the royal drama, while subtly positioning herself between the cameras and the royal family. The foreign diplomats present understood immediately that they were witnessing a potential international incident. Ambassador Jean-Claude Moreau exchanged meaningful glances with his colleagues, all of them calculating how this moment might affect their country's relationships with the kingdom. Such personal scandals involving royal families could have far-reaching political consequences that extended well beyond the palace walls. Dr. Sarah Webb found herself caught in the middle of a situation that threatened to overshadow her charity's important work. Years of planning and preparation for this crucial fundraising event were being destroyed by the royal family's personal drama. She attempted to redirect attention back to the Foundation's mission, but it was clear that no one was interested in discussing children's hospitals when they were witnessing what appeared to be a royal scandal unfolding before their eyes. Royal correspondent Jessica Mills immediately understood that she was witnessing the biggest royal story in decades. Her journalistic instincts kicked into high gear as she mentally composed the headlines that would dominate tomorrow's newspapers. She discreetly activated the voice recording app on her phone while positioning herself to observe every detail of the developing situation. This was the kind of story that could define a career in royal reporting. The orchestra, still playing their carefully rehearsed program, seemed completely out of place as the elegant music continued beneath the drama unfolding in the ballroom. Maestro Rossi, realizing that their performance was no longer appropriate for the situation, gradually brought the music to a gentle conclusion. The sudden silence that followed seemed to amplify the tension that filled every corner of the magnificent room. Tech mogul Robert Chun and his wife Elizabeth found themselves witnesses to what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about moments in royal history. As major donors to the charity, they had expected a routine evening of elegant socializing and tax-deductible giving. Instead, they were watching the careful facade of royal perfection crumble before their eyes. Elizabeth gripped her husband's arm tightly, both of them understanding that they would be telling this story for years to come. Palace staff throughout the ballroom scrambled to respond to a situation for which no amount of training could have prepared them. Head butler Thomas quickly signaled his team to begin implementing crisis protocols, though their usual procedures focused on external threats rather than internal family drama. Servers moved discreetly to collect the broken glass from the Queen's dropped champagne flute while trying to remain invisible during the unfolding crisis. Catherine finally broke free from the moment's spell and stepped back from King Edmund, her face flushing with a combination of embarrassment and something deeper that she couldn't name. Her movement seemed to release the entire ballroom from its suspended animation, and suddenly, everyone was talking at once. She looked around frantically, realizing that hundreds of people had witnessed something that she herself didn't fully understand. King Edmund remained motionless for several more seconds, his hands still extended, as if reaching for Catherine even though she had moved away. His face showed a mixture of desire, regret, and dawning awareness of what he had just revealed in front of his subjects. The careful control he had maintained for decades seemed to have evaporated in a single moment of human weakness that would have consequences far beyond anything he could have imagined. Palace PR director David Sterling felt his worst nightmares coming true as he watched the scene unfold. His phone was already buzzing with calls and messages from media outlets around the world, all of them seeking confirmation and details about what their reporters were describing as an unprecedented royal scandal. He quickly began implementing crisis communication strategies, while knowing that nothing in his experience had prepared him for managing this level of public exposure of royal family dysfunction. Royal biographer Amanda Wright found herself documenting what would certainly become a pivotal chapter in the monarchy's history. She had spent 20 years studying the complex relationships within the royal family, but had never expected to witness such a public revelation of private emotions. Her scholarly mind was already analyzing the implications of what she had observed, while her human heart sympathized with the pain and confusion visible on everyone's faces. The guests continued their shocked conversations in hushed tones, but it was clear that word of the incident was already spreading beyond the ballroom. Several attendees were discreetly texting friends and colleagues, sharing details of what they had witnessed. Others were checking social media to see if any unauthorized photos or videos had already begun circulating online. The palace's careful control over information about the royal family was crumbling as quickly as their reputation for dignity and propriety. Security personnel worked frantically to confiscate phones and cameras while trying to maintain the fiction that this was a routine royal event. But they all understood that the damage was already done. Too many people had witnessed the moment. Too many phones had captured images, and too many powerful individuals would return home with stories that would spread through the kingdom's elite social circles like wildfire. The aftermath of those few seconds would reverberate through every aspect of royal life, forcing everyone involved to confront truths they had been avoiding and make decisions that would shape the future of the monarchy itself. What had begun as an elegant charity gala had become the setting for a revelation that would test the very foundations of the institution that King Edmund had spent his life serving and protecting. The palace stood frozen in a silence so complete that the ancient stones seemed to hold their breath. In the 24 hours following the charity gala, Ravenswood Palace had become the epicenter of a crisis that threatened to shake the very foundations of the monarchy. News of King Edmund's prolonged touch and the obvious emotional connection between him and Catherine had spread through the kingdom's social media faster than wildfire, creating a scandal that dominated every newspaper headline and television broadcast. Queen Margaret sat in her private study, still wearing the same silver gown from the previous evening, unable to bring herself to change clothes or sleep. The shattered remains of her marriage lay around her like broken glass, each piece cutting deeper than the last. Lady Victoria Pemberton had remained at the palace throughout the night, offering support while helping to coordinate the family's response to the crisis. The two women had been friends for 40 years, and Victoria had never seen Margaret so devastated or lost. In another wing of the palace, Catherine paced her sitting room like a caged animal, her navy gown finally, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater that made her look younger and more vulnerable than her 38 years. Her phone had been ringing constantly with calls from friends, family members, and reporters, but she had instructed Maria to intercept everything. Prince William was flying back from his diplomatic mission, cutting short his overseas obligations to deal with the crisis threatening to destroy their marriage and his future as heir to the throne. King Edmund had locked himself in his private office, refusing to see anyone except his closest advisors. Palace PR director David Sterling had been attempting damage control since dawn, fielding hundreds of calls from media outlets around the world while trying to craft a response that could somehow minimize the catastrophic damage to the royal family's reputation. The images from the gala had already been shared millions of times across social platforms, making it impossible to contain or control the narrative. The palace staff moved through their duties like ghosts, speaking in whispers and avoiding eye contact with each other as they tried to process what they had witnessed. Head butler Thomas had called an emergency meeting with his senior staff, instructing them about media protocols and emphasizing the importance of loyalty during what he called the family's most difficult hour. Many of the servants had worked at the palace for decades, serving multiple generations of the royal family, and they felt personally betrayed by the scandal threatening the institution they had devoted their lives to protecting. Outside the palace gates, hundreds of reporters and photographers maintained a constant vigil, their satellite trucks and camera crews creating a media circus that the kingdom had never seen before. Royal correspondent Jessica Mills had filed the story of her career, her detailed account of the evening's events becoming the definitive narrative that other outlets were scrambling to match or exceed. She felt a combination of professional triumph and personal sadness as she watched the family she had covered for so many years begin to tear itself apart in public. The kingdom's citizens were divided in their reactions to the scandal. Social media platforms buzzed with heated debates about royal behavior, family loyalty, and whether the monarchy itself remained relevant in modern times. Some defended Catherine as an innocent victim caught in an impossible situation, while others criticized her for failing to maintain proper distance from her father-in-law. King Edmund faced harsh judgment from those who felt he had betrayed both his wife and his royal duties for personal gratification. Government officials found themselves dealing with a constitutional crisis that no one had anticipated or prepared for. Prime Minister Harrison called an emergency cabinet meeting to discuss the implications of the royal scandal for the kingdom's political stability and international relationships. Foreign allies were beginning to ask questions about the monarchy's reliability as a partner in international affairs, while domestic opposition parties were calling for investigations into the royal family's fitness to serve as national leaders. Religious leaders across the kingdom struggled to address their congregations' questions about moral leadership and the sacred nature of royal marriage vows. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who had officiated at both King Edmund's wedding to Queen Margaret and Prince William's marriage to Catherine, found himself in the impossible position of trying to provide spiritual guidance during a crisis that challenged fundamental beliefs about duty, fidelity, and forgiveness. International media coverage was relentless and often cruel, with tabloids around the world running sensational headlines about the royal love triangle and the palace scandal that shocked the world. Foreign publications that had previously treated the royal family with respectful deference now dissected every aspect of their relationships with clinical precision, analyzing body language from years of public appearances and speculating about the timeline of emotional entanglements. The charity that had brought them all together found itself caught in the crossfire of the royal scandal. Dr. Sarah Webb watched helplessly as her life's work became associated with family dysfunction rather than helping sick children. Major donors began withdrawing their support, concerned about being connected to the controversy, while the media attention that should have boosted their fundraising efforts instead threatened to destroy the foundation's reputation and effectiveness. Behind the palace's closed doors, desperate attempts at crisis management were failing to contain the spreading damage. Palace lawyers worked around the clock to identify legal options for protecting the family's privacy, while communications specialists tried to develop messaging strategies that could somehow restore public confidence in the monarchy. But Everyone involved understood that they were fighting a battle that might already be lost. Catherine finally agreed to meet with a select group of royal advisors, including her personal lawyer and a crisis management specialist who had been flown in from London. The conversation was painful and direct, focusing on the immediate steps needed to protect her children from the media circus while beginning the process of rebuilding her public image. They discussed everything from temporary separation from the palace to complete withdrawal from public life, each option carrying devastating consequences for her future and her family's. Prince William's return to the kingdom created another media frenzy as photographers captured his grim expression and obvious distress. His first priority was meeting privately with Catherine to understand exactly what had happened and how they could move forward together. The couple's relationship had always been strong, but this crisis would test their love and commitment in ways they never could have imagined when they took their wedding vows. Queen Margaret finally emerged from her study to meet with her senior advisors, her usual composure cracked but not completely shattered. She had spent the night making perhaps the most difficult decision of her life, one that would require tremendous personal sacrifice, but might be necessary to save the institution she had served faithfully for over 3 decades. Her conversation with her lawyers and the palace hierarchy would determine the royal family's next steps in managing the unprecedented crisis. King Edmund remained isolated in his office, alternating between deep regret for his actions and desperate hope that somehow the situation could be repaired. His decades of service to the crown, his careful cultivation of public respect and international relationships seemed to be crumbling beneath the weight of a single moment of human weakness. He understood that his choices had consequences far beyond his personal happiness, affecting the stability of the government and the future of the monarchy itself. The palace's ancient walls had witnessed many crises throughout their centuries of existence, but nothing quite like this public revelation of private emotions that threatened to destroy everything the royal family had worked to build and maintain. As the media siege continued outside and the family struggled to find a path forward inside, it became clear that the kingdom was witnessing not just a personal scandal, but a fundamental transformation in the relationship between the monarchy and the people they served. The story that began with an elegant charity gala had become a national conversation about love, duty, forgiveness, and the human cost of public service. Whether the royal family could survive this crisis would depend on their ability to balance personal truths with institutional responsibilities, finding a way to acknowledge their humanity while preserving the dignity and stability that their subjects needed from their leaders. The next few days would determine not just the fate of the individuals involved, but the future of the monarchy itself in a rapidly changing world that demanded both tradition and authenticity from its most prominent public figures.